And this means, wu means none or not, no, negation. Wei has a combination of meanings. It can mean action, making, but the best translation I have found for it is forcing. And so Wu Wei is the principle of not forcing in anything that you do. Now we know when we watch any performance of an artist, be it a dancer or an actor or a musician, we know immediately when the performance is forced. And we say it doesn't ring true, it's too artificial, it doesn't seem to be natural. Many people who study the Taoist doctrines think that Wu Wei means do nothing, in the sense of laissez-faire, be lazy, always be passive. It doesn't mean that. There is a time for action. When you study judo, you use muscle only at the right moment. When your opponent is hopelessly overextended and off balance, and you add a little muscle to it and you throw him across the room. But only then. You never use muscle at the wrong moment. For as Shakespeare knew perfectly well, there is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at its flood, leads on to fortune. And so Wu Wei is based on knowledge of the tide, the drift of things. Get with it. Wu Wei is the art of sailing rather than the art of rowing. So, if you say now, one of the most famous sayings in the Lao Tzu book is superior virtue has no intention to be virtuous, and thus is virtue. Inferior virtue cannot let go of virtuosity, and thus is not virtue. So one could also say, the real Wu Wei is not intentionally Wu Wei, and so is Wu Wei. But inferior Wu Wei so tries to be Wu Wei that it isn't. In other words, this is saying Wu Wei is not a matter of cultivated passivity or even of cultivated spontaneity, because there are people who think that they are released, that they have realized that they are the Tao, as all of us in fact are, or that you are, to put it into Vedanta terms, every one of us is the Brahman, the eternal self of the universe, beyond all description or classification or thought. And say, okay, baby, I'm that. Now I'm going to have a ball. Well, what kind of a ball do they have? Well, what they do is they look up the rules on which society runs and do the opposite. Well, that's still running by the rules of society. And it's the mirror image in reverse. That's not spontaneity. You have to be able to realize that you don't know what you really want to do until you are very quiet. And it tells you. So, to quote Jesus, unless you become again as a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And if you read the Bible, incidentally, which is a very dangerous book, as I'm going to be demonstrating in Playboy this December, but understand heaven in a very literal sense, space. See, we are in heaven now because the earth is a spaceship and heaven is space. What is called in Chinese, Gong, Japanese gu, the void. That's what is important. That most of us don't know this. Even Shakespeare has one of his characters saying, "Oh, that this all too solid flesh would melt." But do you know you're much more space than you are anything else? If the ponderable, I won't say matter, the ponderable whatever in your bodies were condensed and all put together, it would be smaller than the point of a pin. And anyway, somebody once said, even a bishop is 80% water. We are airy nothings. So space is somehow very, very fundamental. We'll go into this in further way. But you understand that heaven is space. And all those references in those nursery rhymes that we learned as children, which were the hymns about heaven. Always we're talking about thrones and crowns and harps and streets of glass. Crystals, transparencies, space. It comes down to space always. Space, which nobody can define, nobody can imagine, appears to be nothing, is the foundation of the universe. But you have to become again as a child to see that. Now you know, go back to your childhood. What were the fascinating things? What's out there? What's beyond the stars? How long does it go on? And Mama said, it goes on always and always and always. The child wonders. He's excited. That this is something that never ends. Then the child asks about time. How long ago is long ago? Well, the Bible says that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Well, what did God do before he did that? Well, as one person said, he sat up thinking punishments in hell for people who ask silly questions. But still, that is only a joke. And the child thinks of God going back and back and back forever, with never beginning. So in the same way you think about death. Go to sleep and never wake up. Never. Whew. Why, it would be as if you never had existed. Not only you, but everything else. Which is, of course, the way things were before you were born. I mean, just turn it backwards. You know, how about waking up after having never gone to sleep? That's quite a thought. There's something fishy about it all. Ichthys, Jesus Christos Theou Ios here, the fish. So we get a funny feeling when we think those questions really through. Very funny feeling. And children, you see, love to get into that funny feeling. Children do all kinds of weird things. They like to spin around as fast as possible, so they watch suddenly the whole ground goes tilting. They do this thing with their eyes, and they go, and they make faces and test out their bodies in all sorts of funny ways, because they know from the beginning that the world is weird. Strange thing. Because everybody knows what it's all about. Only they won't admit it. Being brought up is being taught not to admit it. Because you know very well what's going on. But in order to find out once more as an adult, you have to become again as a child. So what does that involve? It means, ladies and gentlemen, would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? First of all your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly, because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them. And view what is as if you didn't even know how to talk. Red is not red, blue is not blue. Hard is not hard, soft is not soft. Male is not male, female is not female. There is just this jazz. It will not be possible to compel yourselves into this way of looking at things, because what Buddhists call habit energy is going on. And as I talk to you, you will find yourselves thinking in a compulsive and habitual way. This is red, this is green, this is something, this is nothing, this is solid, this is space. All right, but treat those thoughts that are going on in your head in exactly the same way as if they were... See? That's all they are. Like shapes in the spray as the sea breaks on the rocks. Now, please don't get agitated that this is an anti-intellectual point of view, that this is undermining the value of logic and reason and so on. Just we'll bring all that back later when we need it. But just for the time being, let's simplify. Close your eyes. Listen. What is? What do you really and truly, honestly, hear? Don't name it. Just as if it were music. Classic. There comes a peculiar moment in one's life when joy simply vanishes. Not suddenly, like a door slamming shut, but gradually, like a room dimming without anyone touching the lights. You look around and everything is technically the same. The people you used to laugh with are still there. The hobbies you loved still exist. The world has not changed its shape. And yet, you feel as though something essential has slipped quietly out of your hands. You wake up and the day feels flat. You sit among things that used to spark curiosity, and nothing happens. You listen to music that once made your chest bloom with feeling, and it now passes through you like wind through an empty house. Conversations feel muffled. Activities feel distant. Even happiness feels like a memory someone else once told you. You begin to wonder, what's wrong with me? Why does nothing bring me joy anymore? This is perhaps one of the most frightening questions a human being can face, because it touches the deepest fear of all, the fear that something in you has broken. But what if the opposite is true? What if nothing brings you joy because something in you is finally working? You see, joy is not something you manufacture. It is something that arises naturally when you are aligned with your own life. It comes uninvited, like a bird singing on your windowsill. You don't have to force it, and you certainly don't have to chase it. Joy is the fragrance of a life lived from the center of oneself. So, when joy disappears, it is not because you have failed. It is because something in you is shifting, something is dissolving, something is releasing its grip. There is a phase of awakening that no one likes to talk about. A phase where the colors of life fade, the meaning drains out of your ambitions, and the things you once depended on for emotional nourishment no longer satisfy you. You feel empty, unmoved, disconnected, as though the world has stepped away from you. But what has really happened is that you have stepped away from the world you created before you understood yourself. The numbness you feel is not the death of joy. It is the death of stimulation, the death of distraction, the death of an identity that was built to cope, to perform, to impress, to survive. You cannot find joy because you are no longer resonating with the version of yourself that used to seek it. Now, this stage feels terribly confusing. You may think you are depressed, or apathetic, or emotionally dull, but numbness is not a malfunction. Numbness is a signal. It means your inner system is shutting down outdated pathways. It is refusing to sustain the old narrative. It is pulling you inward, away from noise and toward truth. Imagine you are holding a cup filled with muddy water. The more you swirl it, the murkier it becomes. But if you allow it to become still, the sediment sinks. Clarity emerges from quiet, not from motion. In the same way, your joy sinks when life is asking you to be still, not because joy is gone, but because clarity needs space to surface. The absence of emotion is not the beginning of despair. It is the beginning of purification. You see, the universe is remarkably intelligent, far more intelligent than the thinking mind. And when the life you have been living no longer matches the truth of who you are becoming, the universe does a very gentle thing. It withdraws your excitement for that life. It takes away your enthusiasm, your craving, your emotional reward system, not to punish you, but to guide you toward a larger horizon. You cannot stay in old rooms once your soul has outgrown them. But because humans fear stillness, you interpret this withdrawal as a problem. You chase joy harder, only to feel it slip further through your hands. You try to recreate old pleasures, revive old habits, repeat old patterns, but joy does not return, and the more you force, the more exhausted you become. You begin to ask, why can't I feel anything? But stillness is not nothingness. It is information. It is your inner being saying, you must stop now. You must listen. You must see what is really happening. The collapse of joy is the first sign that the old you is dissolving. The identity you built to survive your childhood, or to satisfy society, or to earn validation, or to keep yourself safe, its time has run out. And the dissolution of an identity always feels like the dissolution of feeling, because for a moment you do not know who you are supposed to be. You are no longer the person you once were, but not yet the person you are becoming. This in-between space is emotionally quiet, and in the quiet, joy hides. Not because joy has left, but because it belongs to the self you are growing into, not the self you are shedding. Now, some people try to escape this phase. They try to feel something, anything, through distraction. They seek stimulation, drama, high highs, low lows, anything to convince themselves they are still alive. They fear the quiet because the quiet feels like emptiness. But emptiness is misunderstood. Emptiness is not the absence of life. It is the clearing of space for life to enter. It is the moment the soil is turned before new seeds are planted. You cannot grow anything on ground that is cluttered with old roots. So life uproots you. It empties you of old joy so that new joy can take root. This process is not comfortable, but it is necessary, because the joy you used to feel was not deep enough. It was joy based on external stimulation, joy based on identity, joy that depended on circumstances going your way, joy that could be taken from you. Life wants something more stable for you, something deeper, something that comes from within rather than from the world. And so it takes away the old joy, so you can discover a joy that rises from presence, not performance. And this transition is always prefaced by numbness. Before the heart can feel more, it must feel less. Before consciousness expands, it withdraws from the surface of things. Before the self awakens, it sleeps. This is why nothing brings you joy, because the part of you that used to chase joy is dissolving, and the part of you that will experience real joy has not yet fully awakened. Imagine a caterpillar. Before it becomes a butterfly, there is a moment when it is neither one nor the other. It dissolves entirely into a kind of living soup, a formless in-between. If it were capable of emotion, it might say, "Nothing feels meaningful anymore. I don't know what I am. I feel like nothing." But the caterpillar is not dying. It is reorganizing. You are reorganizing. The numbness is your cocoon. The emptiness is your metamorphosis. You are not losing joy. You are losing the version of yourself that required the world to provide it. And here is something even more subtle. The universe often removes joy when you have been living on borrowed energy, when you have been pushing yourself, ignoring yourself, betraying yourself in small ways, when you have been moving too fast for too long, when your nervous system is exhausted beyond what you can consciously admit. Sometimes nothing brings you joy because your body is simply tired, tired of enduring, tired of pretending, tired of performing optimism, tired of carrying the weight of expectations and emotional obligations, tired of trying to survive without rest. And so joy shuts down, not as a failure, but as protection. Your system cannot run on empty forever. It forces stillness when you refuse to give it willingly. This is why joylessness feels like being underwater. The world is muted because you are being asked to rest. You are being asked to face the quiet truth of your own exhaustion. Now, the mind resists this fiercely. It says, "I shouldn't feel this way. I should be excited. I should be productive. I should be grateful." But the universe is not interested in your shoulds. It is only interested in your truth. And truth often arrives disguised as stillness, because only in stillness can you finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. When joy collapses, meaning begins to loosen. The things that once held your identity together no longer feel solid. You begin to question who you are, what you want, what you believe, and why you have lived the way you have lived. This questioning is not a crisis, it is clarity. It is the beginning of authenticity. To awaken is to feel the collapse of borrowed meaning, the collapse of external joy, the collapse of the old self. To awaken is to pass through numbness on the way to truth. And here is the great paradox. Joy disappears because you are finally ready to feel real joy, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being, not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of presence, not the joy of escape, but the joy of awareness. Real joy does not rise quickly. It rises slowly, like a tide. It rises from quiet, and before it rises, the shoreline must be cleared. This clearing is happening now. You are not broken. You are being prepared. You are not emotionally dead. You are emotionally resetting. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding yourself. The reason nothing brings you joy is because the old you can no longer be satisfied with the world that once comforted it. Your sensitivity is changing. Your awareness is deepening. Your soul is taking the steering wheel from your persona. And personas do not surrender joyfully. So the universe removes joy. It removes stimulation. It removes old meaning. It removes everything you used to lean on. And in that removal, you begin to stand on the ground of yourself for the first time. There is a point, usually after the numbness has lingered longer than you thought you could endure, when something almost imperceptible begins to shift. It does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with fireworks or dramatic emotion. It comes in the smallest way, so subtle that you nearly miss it. A moment where your breath feels slightly deeper. A moment where the world looks a touch less flat. A moment where a sound or a glimpse of light stirs something faint in your chest. It is not joy itself, but the space joy will return to. You see, before joy can return, the place inside you that receives joy has to be rebuilt. The old structure collapsed with your old identity, and you cannot feel joy through an identity that is dissolving. Joy cannot enter a house that is being rebuilt. The foundation must be cleared, the walls must be undone, the windows must be opened. This is the work that numbness does. Numbness is the renovation of the inner world. And once the renovation reaches a certain point, you begin to feel again. Not fully, not dramatically, but honestly. This is the first sign that you have entered the second phase of awakening, the phase where your emotional life begins to reorganize itself around presence rather than identity. You begin to sense that beneath the quiet, something is alive, something is breathing, something is waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. You may wake up one morning and find that the silence feels less like emptiness and more like spaciousness. You may look at the sky and feel a faint recognition of beauty, not because the sky changed, but because your capacity to perceive it is returning. You may sit with yourself and feel a softness that was unavailable to you before. This is how the new joy approaches, not as excitement, but as gentleness, not as a high, but as a deepening. Joy begins to return as presence. Presence is the ability to inhabit your own life without the filter of expectation or fear. It is the ability to feel without interpreting, without managing, without controlling. Presence is the purest form of awareness. It is the ground of all real joy. Now, at first, this presence can feel unfamiliar. You are used to emotion arriving in waves, in highs and lows, in bursts of enthusiasm or disappointment. But presence brings a different flavor of experience. It is quieter, steadier, more patient. It does not intoxicate. It does not overwhelm. It simply reveals. And so joy shuts down, not as a failure, but as protection. Your system cannot run on empty forever. It forces stillness when you refuse to give it willingly. This is why joylessness feels like being underwater. The world is muted because you are being asked to rest. You are being asked to face the quiet truth of your own exhaustion. Now, the mind resists this fiercely. It says, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be excited. I should be productive. I should be grateful. But the universe is not interested in your shoulds. It is only interested in your truth. And truth often arrives disguised as stillness, because only in stillness can you finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. When joy collapses, meaning begins to loosen. The things that once held your identity together no longer feel solid. You begin to question who you are, what you want, what you believe, and why you have lived the way you have lived. This questioning is not a crisis. It is clarity. It is the beginning of authenticity. To awaken is to feel the collapse of borrowed meaning, the collapse of external joy, the collapse of the old self. To awaken is to pass through numbness on the way to truth. And here is the great paradox. Joy disappears because you are finally ready to feel real joy, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being, not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of presence, not the joy of escape, but the joy of awareness. Real joy does not rise quickly. It rises slowly, like a tide. It rises from quiet, and before it rises, the shoreline must be cleared. This clearing is happening now. You are not broken. You are being prepared. You are not emotionally dead. You are emotionally resetting. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding yourself. The reason nothing brings you joy is because the old you can no longer be satisfied with the world that once comforted it. Your sensitivity is changing. Your awareness is deepening. Your soul is taking the steering wheel from your persona. And personas do not surrender joyfully. So the universe removes joy, it removes stimulation, it removes old meaning, it removes everything you used to lean on. And in that removal, you begin to stand on the ground of yourself for the first time. There is a point, usually after the numbness has lingered longer than you thought you could endure, when something almost imperceptible begins to shift. It does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with fireworks or dramatic emotion. It comes in the smallest way, so subtle that you nearly miss it. A moment where your breath feels slightly deeper. A moment where the world looks a touch less flat. A moment where a sound or a glimpse of light stirs something faint in your chest. It is not joy itself, but the space joy will return to. You see, before joy can return, the place inside you that receives joy has to be rebuilt. The old structure collapsed with your old identity, and you cannot feel joy through an identity that is dissolving. Joy cannot enter a house that is being rebuilt. The foundation must be cleared, the walls must be undone, the windows must be opened. This is the work that numbness does. Numbness is the renovation of the inner world. And once the renovation reaches a certain point, you begin to feel again. Not fully, not dramatically, but honestly. This is the first sign that you have entered the second phase of awakening, the phase where your emotional life begins to reorganize itself around presence rather than identity. You begin to sense that beneath the quiet, something is alive, something is breathing, something is waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. You may wake up one morning and find that the silence feels less like emptiness and more like spaciousness. You may look at the sky and feel a faint recognition of beauty, not because the sky changed, but because your capacity to perceive it is returning. You may sit with yourself and feel a softness that was unavailable to you before. This is how the new joy approaches. Not as excitement, but as gentleness. Not as a high, but as a deepening. Joy begins to return as presence. Presence is the ability to inhabit your own life without the filter of expectation or fear. It is the ability to feel without interpreting, without managing, without controlling. Presence is the purest form of awareness. It is the ground of all real joy. Now, at first, this presence can feel unfamiliar. You are used to emotion arriving in waves, in highs and lows, in bursts of enthusiasm or disappointment. But presence brings a different flavor of experience. It is quieter, steadier, more patient. It does not intoxicate. It does not overwhelm. It simply reveals. You begin to see that joy was never lost. It was simply waiting for you to return. The return of joy is the return of truth, the return of alignment, the return of the part of you that was buried beneath effort and identity. It does not matter how long you have been numb. It does not matter how deeply you believe something was wrong with you. Life has been reorganizing you in the dark, preparing you, softening you, bringing you to a place where joy can be recognized again, not as a burst of emotion, but as the quiet radiance of being awake. You see, joylessness is not the opposite of joy. It is the purification of joy. It is the space where old meanings dissolve so new ones can emerge. It is the silence before the deeper life begins. And now you stand at the threshold of that deeper life, a life in which you do not chase feeling, but allow feeling, a life where you do not grasp at joy, but recognize joy in everything, a life where you understand that joy is not something you find, but something you become. Because when the old you falls away, and the noise dissolves, and the numbness clears, you discover something astonishing.
Joy was never in the world. It was always in your awareness of the world, and now that awareness is being restored. Not as it was before, but as something new, something deeper, something clearer, something truer. What returns now is not excitement. What returns now is not stimulation. What returns now is the simple miracle of being alive. This is the joy that cannot be taken from you. This is the joy that arises when you stop chasing and begin listening. This is the joy that emerges when you finally meet your life without resistance. This is the joy that was waiting for you in the silence. And now, because you have passed through the numbness, because you have been emptied, because you have surrendered the old identity, you can finally feel what was here all along. A joy that does not shout, a joy that does not vanish, a joy that does not depend on anything, a joy that simply is. This is the return. This is the rebirth. This is the beginning of a life lived from the center of yourself. And this is where joy begins.
You know, there's something rather amusing about the way we've been taught to talk to God. We approach it as if we're sending a telegram to some distant cosmic emperor who sits on a throne billions of miles away, checking his clipboard to see if we've been good enough to deserve his attention. We kneel down, close our eyes very tightly, fold our hands just so, and then we begin our performance. Dear God, we say, as if we're writing a letter to someone we've never met. I hope you're having a nice day up there. Now, about that thing I wanted... But what if I told you that the whole setup is backwards? What if talking to God has nothing whatever to do with talking to someone else at all? Let me ask you something. When you talk to yourself, do you use words? I don't mean when you're muttering about the grocery list or rehearsing what you're going to say to your boss. I mean in those quiet moments when you're really listening to yourself, when you're trying to figure out what you actually feel about something, what you truly want. In those moments, there's a kind of knowing that happens before words, isn't there? It's more like a recognition, a sensing, a direct awareness of what's going on inside you. Now, here's the curious thing. What we call God, what we might also call the universe, the ground of being, the eternal now, this isn't some separate entity sitting outside of you, checking off items on a list. You see, you are an expression of this whole universe. You're not in the universe like a marble in a box. You are something the universe is doing right here, right now, in the same way that a wave is something the ocean is doing. So when you talk to God, you're not really talking to someone else. You're becoming aware of what you already are. You're tuning in to the fact that this thing you call me is actually the whole cosmos experiencing itself from this particular point of view. Think about it this way. The wave rises up out of the ocean and looks around and says, my goodness, I'm separate from all this water. But of course, that's nonsense. The wave is water. It's made of water. It moves with the water. When it crashes on the shore, it doesn't die. It simply returns to what it always was, the ocean. We are like that wave. We rise up out of this mysterious source, this ground of all being, and we think we're separate from it. We think we have to shout across some vast distance to get its attention. But you can't be separate from it, because you are it. You are the universe looking at itself through your eyes right now. So what does it mean to talk to God? It means to stop, to be quiet, to listen. You see, we've got the whole thing backwards. We think prayer is about speaking, about making our requests known, about explaining our situation to some divine bookkeeper who might not have noticed what's going on in our lives. But the real art is in the listening, not the speaking. When Jesus went off by himself to pray, he wasn't reciting memorized formulas. He was becoming quiet enough to hear. He was letting go of the noise in his head, all the chatter, all the planning and worrying and rehearsing. He was settling into a deeper silence where something else could speak. And what speaks in that silence? Well, that's the whole mystery, isn't it? You might call it intuition, or guidance, or the voice of God. But what it really is reality itself making itself known to you. It's life showing you what wants to happen next. Let me tell you what happens when most people pray. They come with an agenda. They've already decided what should happen. They've figured out exactly how God should fix their problem, exactly what solution would be best. And then they dress it all up in humble language. If it be thy will, Lord, please do exactly what I've already decided should happen. But this is rather like going to a doctor and saying, I've diagnosed my own condition and prescribed my own treatment. Now please give me what I've decided I need. The doctor might smile and say, perhaps we should examine you first, don't you think? The correct way to talk to God is to come empty. To come not knowing. To come without your list of demands and requirements. To come as pure listening, pure receptivity, pure openness to what is. This is not passivity. This is not. It's something much more alive than that. It's like swimming in a river. If you try to control the water, if you try to force it to flow in a different direction, you'll exhaust yourself and probably drown. But if you relax into the current, if you feel which way it's moving and flow with it, then you discover you can navigate with incredible grace and power. When you sit quietly and stop all your internal chattering, something remarkable happens. At first, you notice all the noise, all the thoughts bouncing around like popcorn in a hot pan, all the worries, the plans, the memories, the fantasies. And your first instinct will be to try to stop them, to push them away, to make your mind blank and pure. But you see, this too is just more doing. It's more controlling. It's more of you trying to force reality to match your idea of how it should be. Instead, simply watch. Watch the thoughts come and go like clouds drifting across the sky. You don't have to do anything with them. You don't have to believe them or act on them or push them away. Just watch. And in the watching, something begins to happen. The thoughts begin to slow down. The chatter begins to quiet. And in that quietness, you begin to sense something else. A presence, an awareness, a sense of being held by something much larger than yourself. This is what Jesus meant when he said the kingdom of heaven is within you. He wasn't talking about some future reward or some place you go when you die. He was talking about this direct awareness of your unity with all that is. This recognition that you are not separate from the source of all life. Now I know what you're thinking. But what about my problems? What about the things I need help with? Are you telling me I should just sit quietly and do nothing while my life falls apart? Not at all. But here's what I am saying. The help you need doesn't come from some external deity who might or might not decide to intervene. It comes from this deeper wisdom that emerges when you get your anxious, controlling little ego out of the way. When you're all wound up in worry, when you're frantically trying to figure everything out, when you're desperately praying for God to change your circumstances, you're like a radio that's jammed with static. The signal is there, but you can't hear it because you're making too much noise. But when you become quiet, when you let go of your agenda, when you stop trying to control the outcome, something amazing happens. Solutions appear that you couldn't have thought of. Opportunities open up that you didn't know existed. You find yourself saying and doing exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, not because you planned it, but because you got out of your own way and let life flow through you. This is what it means to pray without ceasing, as Paul put it. It doesn't mean walking around all day reciting prayers. It means living in this state of open awareness, this constant listening, this ongoing recognition of your connection to the source of all being. Let me give you an example. Suppose you're worried about money. The usual way of praying about this is to ask God to give you money, to make your circumstances better, to solve your financial problems. But notice what this does. It keeps you focused on the problem. It reinforces the belief that you don't have enough. It makes you feel powerless and dependent on some external force to rescue you. But suppose instead you sit quietly and simply become aware of your breathing. You notice the air moving in and out. You notice that you didn't have to learn how to breathe. Your body just knows. It's been breathing you since the moment you were born, and it will continue breathing you until the moment you die, without any effort or worry on your part. And then you expand that awareness. You notice that your heart is beating, your food is digesting, your cells are doing their incredible dance of life. All of this is happening without any conscious control from you. The intelligence that runs your body is vastly greater than your conscious mind. And this intelligence, this organizing principle, this creative force, it's the same intelligence that spins the galaxies and grows the trees and brings the spring after winter. It's all one thing. And you are not separate from it. You are one of its expressions. When you really feel this, when you sense your connection to this vast creative intelligence, something shifts. You stop feeling like a beggar asking for scraps. You start feeling like what you are, an integral part of this whole magnificent process. And from that place, from that sense of connection and trust, you begin to act differently. You make different choices. You see opportunities you missed before. You find resources you didn't know you had. The money problem might or might not resolve itself immediately, but your relationship to it changes. You stop being paralyzed by fear. You stop making desperate decisions. You start flowing with life instead of fighting against it. This is what Jesus demonstrated over and over again. He didn't stand apart from the Father, begging and pleading. He said, I and the Father are one. He lived from that place of unity. And from that place, the so-called miracles happen naturally, not as violations of natural law, but as expressions of a deeper understanding of how things actually work. Now you might say, but what about gratitude? Shouldn't we thank God for what we have? Of course. But again, we've misunderstood what gratitude really is. It's not about keeping God happy, like a child thanking a parent so they'll get dessert. Real gratitude is simply the recognition of the gift that existence is. Look at this. You are alive. You can see, hear, taste, touch, smell. You can think and feel and experience this astonishing world. None of this is ordinary. None of this is something you earned or deserved. It's pure gift. It's grace. It's miracle. When you really see this, when you really feel the extraordinary nature of the most ordinary moment, a glass of water, a breath of air, the warmth of the sun, gratitude arises naturally. You don't have to manufacture it or perform it. It simply bubbles up from the recognition of how blessed you already are. And this gratitude changes everything. It shifts you from a state of lack to a state of abundance, from fear to trust, from grasping to receiving, and in that state you become a channel for even more life, even more creativity, even more blessing to flow through you. So here's the correct way to talk to God. Sit down. Close your eyes if you like, or leave them open and softly focused. Take a few deep breaths and feel your body relaxing. Notice the thoughts bouncing around in your head, but don't follow them. Just watch them come and go. And then, without words, without any formulas or scripts, simply open yourself. Be receptive. Be listening. Be aware. Notice the silence underneath all the noise. Notice the space in which all experience is happening. Notice that you are aware, and this awareness is not separate from what you're aware of. You might sense a presence. You might have insights bubble up. You might simply feel a sense of peace or connection. Or nothing much might happen at all, and that's fine too. You're not doing this to get something. You're doing it to remember what you are. And then as you go about your day, carry this awareness with you. When you're washing dishes, really wash the dishes. Feel the warm water. Notice the bubbles. Be completely present to this simple act. When you're talking to someone, really listen. Don't plan your response. Don't judge what they're saying. Just be there, fully present, fully open. This is prayer. Not the words you recite, but the quality of your presence. Not the requests you make, but the awareness you bring to each moment. When you live this way, you discover something wonderful. The distinction between sacred and ordinary dissolves. Everything becomes prayer. Making breakfast is prayer. Walking to work is prayer. Listening to a friend is prayer. Because you're no longer separate from the source. You're no longer trying to get God's attention. You're simply being what you are, a unique expression of the divine, a particular way that the universe is experiencing itself. And from this place, when you do speak words of prayer, they come from a different source. They're not demands or bargaining or performance. They're expressions of this deeper awareness. They might sound like, thank you, or help me see clearly, or simply yes. You see, the correct way to talk to God is to recognize that there's no one to talk to. There's only this eternal now, this present moment, this direct experience of being alive, and you are not separate from it. You are it. So stop trying so hard. Stop performing. Stop pretending you're someone you're not, talking to something outside yourself. Just be quiet. Just listen. Just open yourself to what is, and in that openness, you'll find that you're already being prayed through. The universe is speaking itself through you. Life is living itself as you. God, if you want to use that word, is not something you talk to. It's what you are. This is the secret that the mystics have known in every tradition, that the seeker and the sought are one, that the prayer and the prayed to are the same thing looking at itself from different angles, that prayer is not communication between separate beings, but the universe becoming conscious of itself. So the correct way to talk to God is to stop talking and start listening, to stop seeking and start being, to stop performing and start experiencing. And in that simple shift, everything changes. Not because God finally heard you and decided to answer, but because you remembered what you always were, an inseparable part of the whole. There's a peculiar phenomenon that occurs in human consciousness. And most people go through their entire lives without ever recognizing it. It's so fundamental, so pervasive, that it becomes invisible, like the air we breathe or the water a fish swims in. And that phenomenon is this. Nearly everything you do, nearly every decision you make, nearly every word you speak is filtered through a question that runs constantly in the background of your mind. That question is, what will they think of me? Now, you may not consciously ask this question. In fact, you probably believe you're acting independently, making your own choices, living your own life. But observe yourself carefully. Watch yourself in conversation. Notice how you choose your words, how you modulate your voice, how you present your opinions. Notice how much energy you expend trying to create a particular impression, trying to manage how others perceive you. This need for approval begins early, of course. As children, we quickly learn that our survival depends on pleasing the adults around us. A baby cries and mother comes. This is the first lesson in cause and effect, in the power of gaining another's attention and approval. As we grow, the pattern becomes more sophisticated. We learn to smile at the right moments, to say the things that earn praise, to hide the parts of ourselves that meet with disapproval or punishment. And gradually, imperceptibly, we construct a false self, a performing self, a self that exists primarily in the eyes of others. The tragedy is that we forget this is what we're doing. We identify completely with this performing self and mistake it for who we really are. We become so skilled at the performance that we no longer know where the performance ends and our authentic being begins, if indeed there's anything left of that authentic being at all. Now, what I want to talk about today is what happens when you stop this exhausting performance. What happens when you cease to seek the approval of others. And I want to be very clear about what I mean by this, because it's easily misunderstood. I'm not talking about becoming rude or inconsiderate. I'm not suggesting you should deliberately offend people or disregard their feelings. I'm not advocating for selfish behavior or cruelty. What I'm talking about is something far more subtle and far more profound. I'm talking about the moment when you stop organizing your entire existence around the question of whether others approve of you. This is a revolutionary shift in consciousness. Because when you're constantly seeking approval, you're not really living your own life, you're living a kind of reflection of what you imagine others want you to be. And the exhausting thing is that these others are themselves seeking approval. So you're trying to please people who are trying to please people who are trying to please people, in an endless hall of mirrors where nobody is actually home. Let me describe what this approval seeking looks like in practice. You're at a gathering, and someone asks your opinion about something, politics, religion, art, whatever it might be. Now, if you're honest with yourself, you'll notice that before you answer, there's a split-second calculation. You're quickly assessing the room, trying to determine what opinion will make you look good, what answer will earn respect or agreement or admiration. You're not asking yourself what you actually think. You're asking yourself what you should say to create the desired impression. Or consider your work, your career. How much of what you do is genuinely interesting to you, and how much is performed for the approval of employers, colleagues, society at large? How many people are in careers they don't enjoy, living lives that don't fit them, all because they're trying to meet someone else's expectations, parents, perhaps, or some abstract notion of success that they've absorbed from their culture? Or look at relationships. How often do people stay in friendships or romantic partnerships, not because these relationships nourish them, but because leaving would invite disapproval? How much suffering is endured? How much authenticity is sacrificed, all to avoid the judgment of others? The need for approval is a kind of prison. And like most prisons, it's largely invisible to those trapped inside it. You don't see the bars because you've been looking through them your whole life. They've become part of the landscape, part of the assumed structure of reality. But here's what's extraordinary. The moment you recognize this prison, the moment you truly see it for what it is, something begins to shift. And the moment you stop seeking approval, not as a rebellious act, not as a way of proving something, but simply because you see the futility and exhaustion of it, everything changes. Let me tell you what I mean by everything changes. First, you discover who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who others want you to be, but who you actually are beneath all the layers of performance and pretense. And this discovery is often surprising, because the authentic self is quite different from the performing self. The authentic self has different interests, different values, different desires than the self you've been presenting to the world. The authentic self might enjoy things you've been pretending not to enjoy. It might be drawn to paths you've been avoiding because they didn't seem respectable or impressive enough. It might have opinions that don't fit neatly into the categories that would win approval. When you stop seeking approval, you give yourself permission to discover these things. You can finally ask yourself, what do I actually enjoy? What actually interests me? What do I actually think about this? Not what should I enjoy, or what would make me look intelligent to think, but what's actually true for me. This is tremendously liberating, because you've been carrying around all these shoulds and oughts, all these ideas about who you're supposed to be, and suddenly you can put them down. You can stop performing. You can stop managing your image. You can simply be. Now, when this happens, something remarkable occurs in your relationships with others. The people who were drawn to your performing self, the people who approved of you as long as you played the role they wanted you to play, these people tend to fall away. And this can be painful. You may lose friendships, even family relationships. People may express disappointment, confusion, even anger. You've changed, they'll say, often with a tone of accusation. And it's true, you have changed. Or rather, you've stopped pretending. You stopped contorting yourself to fit their expectations. And they experience this as betrayal because, in a sense, you've broken an unspoken contract. The contract was, I'll approve of you as long as you continue to be the person I want you to be. But here's what's extraordinary. At the same time that some relationships fall away, others deepen. Because when you stop performing, when you stop seeking approval, you become authentic. And authenticity has a magnetic quality. People who are themselves seeking authenticity, who are tired of superficial relationships and social games, are drawn to it. You begin to attract people who appreciate you for who you actually are, not for the mask you wear. And these relationships are profoundly different from approval-based relationships. They're based on genuine recognition, on actually seeing and being seen. They're nourishing rather than exhausting, because you're not constantly working to maintain an image. You can relax, you can be yourself. Moreover, when you stop seeking approval, you stop being manipulable. Think about how much of advertising, politics, social pressure operates through the mechanism of approval and disapproval. Buy this product and you'll be admired. Adopt this opinion and you'll be respected. Behave this way and you'll fit in. The entire machinery of social control depends on people desperately seeking approval. When you're no longer seeking approval, this machinery loses its power over you. You can't be controlled through shame or the promise of status. You are free to make decisions based on what's actually true for you, what actually serves your well-being and the well-being of others, rather than what will earn you gold stars from some authority or peer group. This doesn't mean you become indifferent to others. In fact, paradoxically, when you stop seeking approval, you often become more genuinely considerate. Because consideration that comes from seeking approval is really just another form of manipulation. You're being nice because you want something in return, even if what you want is just a positive opinion. But consideration that comes from simply recognizing others as fellow beings, not as sources of approval or disapproval, is authentic kindness. Now, I want to talk about the fear that arises when you contemplate stopping the approval-seeking behavior. Because there is fear, tremendous fear. The mind presents you with catastrophic scenarios. If I stop trying to please people, I'll be alone. I'll be rejected. I'll be cast out. I'll lose everything. And there's a reason for this fear. It goes back to our evolutionary history, to a time when being cast out of the tribe meant death. To be alone was to be vulnerable to predators, to starvation, to the elements. So the fear of disapproval is ancient and deep. It feels like a matter of survival. But here's what you must understand. That ancient fear is no longer relevant in the way it once was. You're not going to die if some people disapprove of you. You're not going to be cast out into the wilderness to face predators. The worst that can happen is that some people won't like you. And when you really examine this, when you really look at the prospect of some people not liking you, you realize it's not actually catastrophic. In fact, it's inevitable. No matter what you do, no matter how much you perform, some people won't like you anyway. There's a wonderful freedom in accepting this. Some people won't like you, and that's perfectly fine. You don't need universal approval. You don't need everyone to think well of you. You just need to live authentically and find the people who resonate with that authenticity. Let me share something from my own experience. For many years, particularly in my younger days, I was enormously concerned with what people thought of me. As someone interested in philosophy and religion, as someone who eventually became a teacher of sorts, I was constantly aware of my reputation. I wanted to be respected, to be taken seriously, to be admired for my knowledge and insight. And this concern shaped everything I did. It shaped what I wrote, what I said in lectures, even how I dressed and spoke. I was performing the role of the wise teacher, the knowledgeable philosopher. And it was exhausting, though I didn't fully recognize how exhausting until something shifted. The shift came gradually. Through my study of Zen, through my own meditation practice, through simply growing older and wearier of the performance, I began to care less about approval. I began to say what I actually thought rather than what would sound impressive. I began to admit when I didn't know something rather than pretending to knowledge I didn't have. I began to laugh at myself, to show my flaws and uncertainties. And do you know what happened? Some people were indeed disappointed. Some people decided I wasn't as wise as they'd thought, wasn't worthy of respect after all. But others, and these were the people who mattered, appreciated the authenticity. They found it refreshing. They felt they could finally relate to me as a human being rather than as an image or an authority. More importantly, I felt free. I could breathe. I could explore ideas without worrying whether they were respectable. I could admit confusion, doubt, not knowing. I could simply be myself, with all my contradictions and imperfections. And this freedom was worth infinitely more than any approval I'd been seeking. Now, Let me speak about what happens in that moment when you stop seeking approval. And I do mean a moment, though it's also a process. There's often a specific moment of recognition, a shift in consciousness, where you suddenly see the whole game clearly. You see how much energy you've been expending on managing others' opinions. You see how futile it is, how exhausting, how it keeps you from actually living. In that moment, something drops away. The burden drops away, and there's a tremendous lightness, a sense of relief. It's as if you've been carrying a heavy load up a mountain your whole life, and suddenly you realize you can put it down. Nobody actually requires you to carry it. You were carrying it only because you thought you had to. This doesn't mean the old patterns instantly disappear. The habit of seeking approval is deeply ingrained. You'll still catch yourself doing it. Still notice that split-second calculation before you speak. Still feel that pang of anxiety when someone disapproves. But now you see it happening. You're aware of it. And awareness itself begins to dissolve the pattern. You start to notice, there it is again. I was about to modify what I was going to say because I was worried about what they'd think. And in noticing it, you have a choice. You can continue with the modification, or you can take a breath and say what you actually mean. Each time you choose authenticity over approval seeking, the pattern weakens a little more. And as the pattern weakens, everything does shift. Your relationships shift, as I've described. Your work shifts. You may find yourself drawn to different kinds of work, or approaching your current work in a different way. Your daily experience shifts, because you're no longer expending so much energy on impression management. You have energy available for actually experiencing life, for being present, for engaging genuinely with whatever arises. Even your sense of self shifts, because when you're constantly seeking approval, your sense of self is fundamentally unstable. It depends on others' opinions, which are changeable and often contradictory. One person approves, another disapproves, and you're torn between them, not knowing who you are. But when you stop seeking approval, you discover a more stable sense of self, not a fixed, permanent self, but a sense of being that doesn't depend on external validation. This is what the Eastern traditions have been pointing to all along. The Taoists speak of Wu Wei, effortless action, acting from your true nature rather than from learned patterns and social conditioning. The Buddhists speak of dropping the ego, which is largely composed of these approval-seeking patterns and the images we present to others. The Hindus speak of discovering the Atman, the true self, beneath all the layers of social identity. When you stop seeking approval, you're not becoming a different person. You're stopping being all the false persons you've been pretending to be. You're allowing what you actually are to emerge and express itself naturally. Now, I want to address a question that often arises, but don't we need some social harmony? Don't we need to consider others? Won't everyone just become selfish and inconsiderate if they stop caring what others think? This question misunderstands what I'm saying. I'm not suggesting you become indifferent to others' well-being. I'm not advocating for selfish disregard of how your actions affect people. What I'm saying is that you can be genuinely considerate without seeking approval. In fact, approval seeking often makes people less genuinely considerate because they're focused on managing impressions rather than actually being present with others. Real consideration comes from empathy, from recognizing others as conscious beings like yourself, from naturally wanting to act in ways that don't cause unnecessary harm. This has nothing to do with seeking approval and everything to do with basic human decency and awareness. Moreover, much of what passes for social harmony is really just collective pretense. Everyone performing for everyone else. Nobody saying what they actually think or feel, all carefully maintaining acceptable facades. This isn't genuine harmony, it's a kind of mutual deception. Real harmony, real community can only be built on authenticity. It requires people who are willing to be real with each other, even when that's uncomfortable. So when you stop seeking approval, you're not destroying the possibility of genuine relationship and community. You're creating it. You're inviting others into authentic connection rather than the shadow play of social performance. Let me end with this. The moment you stop seeking approval is the moment you begin to live. Not the life you think you should live, not the life others want you to live, but your actual life. The one that's been waiting for you all along. beneath all the performance and pretense. And when you begin to live this life, you discover something wonderful. You discover that you're enough. Not perfect, you'll still have flaws, still make mistakes, still have struggles and uncertainties, but you're enough. You don't need anyone's approval to validate your existence. You're already valid. You were always valid. You just couldn't see it while you were so busy trying to earn what you already had. This is the great shift, from seeking to being, from performing to simply existing, from the exhausting effort of trying to become acceptable to the profound peace of recognizing that you already are. This is freedom. This is what it means to finally come home to yourself. Thank you.
You know, there's a peculiar kind of exhaustion that settles into a person, and it has nothing to do with how much sleep you've had or how hard you've worked during the day. It's deeper than that. It's the exhaustion that comes from looking at your life, at all the things you do, all the things you're supposed to care about, and finding yourself asking that most dangerous of questions: what's the point of any of this? Now, this isn't a question that announces itself with trumpets. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic crisis, though sometimes it can. More often, it seeps in quietly, like water finding its way through the smallest cracks. You're going through your routine, doing what you've always done, and suddenly you notice that the meaning has leaked out of everything. The things that used to matter, the goals that used to pull you forward, they're still there, but they've become strangely weightless, hollow. You go through the motions because, well, what else would you do? But the felt sense of purpose, that vital energy that makes it all seem worthwhile, has simply evaporated. And here's what makes it so disorienting. You look around and everyone else seems to be managing just fine. They're excited about their projects, their relationships, their plans for the future. They talk about their goals with genuine enthusiasm, as if these things really matter, as if they've found some secret you somehow missed. And you wonder, am I broken? Have I seen through something I wasn't supposed to see through? Or have I simply fallen into some kind of depression, some chemical imbalance that's stolen my ability to care? The feeling often starts with the big things. You think about your career, and you realize you're climbing a ladder that doesn't actually lead anywhere you want to go. Or perhaps it does lead somewhere. But when you imagine arriving at that destination, you can't find any real satisfaction in the image. You'll have the title, the salary, the recognition, and then what? More of the same, just at a higher altitude. You see your colleagues who've made it to where you're heading, and they don't seem any more fulfilled than you are. They've just gotten better at hiding it. Or perhaps they've stopped asking the question altogether. Then it spreads to the smaller things, the daily activities that are supposed to add texture and meaning to life. Hobbies feel like elaborate distractions. Entertainment becomes a way to fill time rather than something genuinely enjoyable. Even relationships can start to feel like performances, roles you're playing, because that's what people do. You love your family, your friends, but there's this strange distance, as if you're watching yourself interact with them from somewhere far away, going through the appropriate emotional responses without really feeling them fully. And the future, the future becomes particularly problematic because our entire lives are organized around the future, aren't they? We're always working towards something, saving for something, preparing for something. But when everything feels pointless, the future collapses into an endless repetition of the same empty present. You'll wake up tomorrow, go through your routine, have your experiences, go to sleep, and then do it all again and again and again. For what? To survive so you can continue surviving? To be happy when happiness itself has started to feel like just another item on an impossible checklist? Now, when this feeling arrives, people typically respond in one of several ways, and none of them quite work.
Before we continue, many of you have been asking for something longer, something with actual practices you can use in daily life. So check out the 3-hour audiobook that takes everything we explore in these videos and gives you the tools to actually work with it. Because here's the thing, intellectual understanding without practical application just keeps you spinning in your head. You need both, the insight and the practice, the philosophy and the daily work that makes it real. This audiobook gives you that. 3 hours of deep wisdom with practices built in, so you're not just thinking differently, you're living differently. If you're serious about changing how you experience your life, the link is in the description below. Now, let's continue.
The first response is to try harder. You think, well, perhaps I just need to find the right goal, the right purpose. So you look around for something that might fill this void. Maybe it's a new career path, something more meaningful, more aligned with your values. Maybe it's a creative project, something that will express your authentic self. Maybe it's a relationship, a person who will make everything feel worthwhile again. Or perhaps it's a cause, something bigger than yourself that you can dedicate your energy to. And so you pursue these things with a kind of desperate intensity. You throw yourself into the new job, the new hobby, the new relationship. And for a while, it works. There's excitement, novelty, the feeling that, yes, this is it, I found what was missing. But then, slowly or suddenly, that feeling fades. The new job becomes just another job. The creative project becomes another obligation. The relationship settles into routine. The cause reveals its limitations and contradictions. And you're back where you started, only now with the added burden of knowing that even when you find what you're looking for, it doesn't actually solve the problem. The second response is to try to think your way out of it. You read philosophy, psychology, self-help books. You're looking for the right perspective, the right framework that will make everything make sense again. And there's some value in this, certainly. Understanding can be helpful. But you notice something peculiar happens. You can understand intellectually that life has meaning. You can follow the arguments, agree with the conclusions, and yet the feeling of pointlessness remains untouched. It's as if there are two separate tracks running in you. One track knows all the right answers, can articulate why life matters, why your actions have significance. The other track, the one you actually live from, remains unconvinced, unmoved. Some people try to simply override the feeling. They commit to a philosophy or a belief system that tells them what matters, and they force themselves to care about those things. They create structure, discipline, routines. They tell themselves that meaning is something you create through commitment and action, not something you feel. And this can work for a time. You can function quite well, actually, by simply deciding that certain things matter and acting accordingly, regardless of how you feel about it. But there's an exhaustion in this approach, isn't there? A constant effort of will. And every now and then, in the quiet moments, the question returns, but why am I doing this? What's the point of forcing myself to care about things I don't actually care about? Then there's the route of distraction, which is perhaps the most common response of all. You keep yourself busy, entertained, stimulated. You fill every moment with activity, with media, with social interaction, with anything that keeps the question at bay. And modern life makes this remarkably easy. There's always something to watch, something to scroll through, something to occupy your attention. You can go days, weeks, even months without ever sitting still long enough for the feeling to fully surface. But it's there, isn't it? Underneath everything. And the moments when it breaks through, those moments become increasingly uncomfortable, increasingly difficult to bear. Some people turn to pleasure, to sensation. They pursue experiences that make them feel alive, even temporarily. Adventure, romance, substances, risk. Anything that creates intensity, that cuts through the numbness. And there's a logic to this. If nothing matters, then at least you can feel something, anything. The problem is that pleasure has this diminishing return. What once thrilled you becomes ordinary. You need more intensity, more novelty, more stimulation to achieve the same effect. And eventually you realize you're running faster and faster just to stay in the same place, still feeling that underlying emptiness. And then there's the philosophical response, the one that says, well, if nothing matters, then I'm free. If there's no inherent meaning, no cosmic purpose, then I can do whatever I want. This is the existentialist position. And there's something appealing about it. It sounds liberating. But notice what actually happens when you try to live from this place. The freedom feels more like abandonment than liberation. Yes, you can do whatever you want, but what do you want? Without any felt sense of what matters, freedom becomes a kind of paralysis. Every option is equally meaningless, which means there's no real basis for choosing one thing over another. What makes this whole experience particularly isolating is that it's so difficult to talk about. When you try to explain it to someone, they often respond with solutions, with suggestions, with reassurance. Have you tried exercise, therapy? Maybe you need a vacation. Maybe you're depressed and should consider medication. And these might all be helpful things, genuinely. But they miss the point, don't they? Because what you're experiencing isn't a problem to be solved. It's more like a question that won't go away, a seeing that can't be unseen. Or people will try to inspire you. They'll remind you of all the good things in your life, all the reasons you have to be grateful, all the people who love you, all the opportunities available to you. And you know they're right. Objectively, logically, you know you have a good life, perhaps even a great life. But that knowledge doesn't touch the feeling. It's like someone describing a delicious meal to you when you've lost your sense of taste. Yes, I understand this is supposed to be good, but I can't actually taste it. Sometimes the feeling becomes so pervasive that you start to wonder if this is just what life is, and everyone else is simply better at pretending otherwise. Maybe all of human civilization is just an elaborate distraction from this fundamental emptiness. We create culture, art, science, religion, relationships, all these complex systems and structures, not because they're inherently meaningful, but because we need to give ourselves something to do, some way to avoid facing the void at the center of everything. And there's a particularly modern dimension to this experience. Because we live in a time of unprecedented material comfort and opportunity, at least for many of us, our ancestors were too busy surviving to ask whether life had a point. The question of meaning was answered by necessity. You worked to eat, you had children to continue the family line, you participated in your community because you needed each other to survive. Purpose was built into the structure of life itself. But now, for many of us, survival is relatively secure. We have time, resources, options. We're told we can be anything, do anything, create our own meaning. And this freedom, this abundance of choice, it can actually make the question of pointlessness more acute. Because when you can do anything, the question becomes, yes, but what should I do? And who's to say? On what basis do you choose? What makes one path more meaningful than another when all paths are equally available and equally optional? You see this especially in the realm of work. Previous generations had roles, vocations, callings. You were a farmer because your family were farmers. You were a craftsman because that's what your community needed. Your work was woven into a larger social fabric that gave it context and significance. But now, work is supposed to be a form of self-expression, a source of personal fulfillment. You're supposed to find your passion, follow your purpose, make a difference. And if you don't feel passionate, if you don't feel fulfilled, if you're not making a difference, well, that's a personal failure, isn't it? You failed to find the meaningful work that was supposedly there waiting for you. The same pattern appears in relationships. They're supposed to complete you, make you happy, give your life meaning. Your partner is supposed to be your soulmate, your best friend, your source of passion and comfort and growth all at once. And if your relationship doesn't provide all these things, if it feels more like comfortable companionship than cosmic significance, you wonder if you're missing something, if you're with the wrong person, if real love would feel different. Even leisure time becomes fraught. You're supposed to have hobbies that enrich you, experiences that broaden you, travels that transform you. Every moment is supposed to be optimized, meaningful, worthwhile. And so when you find yourself spending your free time just, sitting there, or scrolling mindlessly, or doing something that doesn't improve you or fulfill you, there's this nagging sense of waste, of failure, of life slipping through your fingers while you do nothing important with it. And underneath all of this, underneath all these attempts to find meaning or create meaning or convince yourself that meaning exists, there's a simpler, more fundamental question. The question isn't really, what's the point of this particular activity or that particular goal? The question is, what's the point of me? Why am I here? What is this strange fact of my existence for? I didn't choose to be born. I didn't ask for consciousness, for this awareness that can turn back on itself and question its own purpose. And yet here I am, thrown into existence, expected to figure out what to do with it, expected to care about it, expected to find it meaningful. When you really sit with this, when you let yourself feel the full weight of it, there's a kind of vertigo, because you realize that you are this temporary, fragile, utterly contingent thing. You appeared out of nothing, you'll return to nothing, and in between, you're supposed to somehow make it all matter. You're supposed to care deeply about things that, in the grand scheme of the universe, don't register at all. The universe doesn't care if you're happy or sad, successful or unsuccessful, if you fulfill your potential or waste your life. It simply doesn't care. It's indifferent. And you're just a brief ripple in an incomprehensibly vast process that was unfolding long before you arrived and will continue long after you're gone. Now, you might think this recognition would make things worse, and often it does, at first, because it seems to confirm the feeling of pointlessness. If nothing matters in any ultimate sense, if the universe is indifferent, if we're all just temporary patterns of matter and energy that will eventually dissipate, then what's the point of anything? Why not just give up? Why not just surrender to the meaninglessness of it all? But here's where something interesting happens, if you stay with it long enough, because there's something else underneath the pointlessness, underneath the exhaustion and the emptiness and the endless questioning. There's a deeper current that you can only feel when you stop trying so hard to find meaning or create meaning or prove that meaning exists. And that's what we need to look at. Not as another solution, not as another answer to the question of pointlessness, but as a different way of being with the question itself. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really consider it. When you say everything feels pointless, what is it that's doing the feeling? Who is it that's noticing the pointlessness? There's something here, isn't there? Something present, something aware. And that something, that awareness, it doesn't feel pointless. The awareness itself, the consciousness that's watching all of this, questioning all of this, it's not empty. It's actually quite full, quite alive, quite present. You see, we've gotten ourselves into a very peculiar bind. We've confused the meaning of our lives with the meaning of our thoughts about our lives. We think that life feels pointless because we can't think of a point to it. But life isn't something you think. Life is something you are. And the being of life, the actual living presence of existence, it doesn't require a point. It doesn't need justification. It doesn't need to prove its worth. It simply is. And the isness of it, the sheer fact of being alive and aware, that's not pointless. That's not empty. That's the most fundamental fullness there is. Now, I know this might sound like semantic games, like I'm just playing with words. But stay with me, because something important is happening here. When you look for the point of life, you're looking in the wrong direction. You're looking forward into the future, towards some goal or purpose or destination that will make everything worthwhile. But life isn't happening in the future. Life is happening now. This moment, this breath, this sensation of being present and aware, this is life. Not the story about life, not the meaning of life, but life itself. And when you really pay attention to life itself, when you stop for a moment asking what it's for and simply notice what it is, something shifts. Because life, the actual immediate experience of being alive, it's extraordinary. Not because it's always pleasant or comfortable or fulfilling, but because it's here at all. The fact that there is something rather than nothing, the fact that you exist to experience anything whatsoever, this is, when you think about it, completely miraculous. You see, the question of pointlessness arises from a very specific assumption, an assumption we rarely examine. The assumption is that things need to have a point, that existence requires justification, that being alive is only worthwhile if it's for something. But where did this assumption come from? Who told you that your life needs a purpose beyond itself? Who said that the experience of existing isn't enough, that it needs to lead somewhere, accomplish something, mean something beyond what it already is? This is what I call the trap of instrumentality. We've learned to see everything as a means to an end. You go to school so you can get a job. You get a job so you can make money. You make money so you can be secure. You're secure so you can be happy. You're happy so you can, well, what? Live a meaningful life? And what's a meaningful life? One that has a point. And what's the point? To be happy. And around we go, each thing justified by the next thing, but never arriving at anything that's valuable in itself. But life itself, the actual living of it, isn't an instrument. It's not a means to something else. It's the thing itself. When you eat a delicious meal, you don't eat it in order to be full. Being full is part of the experience, certainly. But the point of eating isn't to arrive at fullness and then be done with it. The point of eating, if we must use that word, is the eating, the tasting, the savoring, the actual experience of it. And life is like this. The point of life isn't to arrive at some future state where you can finally say, now it all makes sense. Now it's been worthwhile. The point of life, if there is one, is the living of it right here, right now. You know what happens when you listen to music? You don't listen to a symphony in order to reach the final note. The final note isn't the point. If it were, the best music would be the shortest music. Just play that last note and be done with it. But that's absurd, isn't it? The point of music is the music itself, the unfolding of sound in time, the experience of listening moment by moment. And life is like this too. It's not going anywhere. There's no destination you're trying to reach where you can finally rest and say, there, I've successfully lived. Life is what's happening along the way, in the supposed in-between times that we think don't count. Now, I can almost hear the objection forming. You're thinking, yes, but that's all well and good for moments of pleasure or beauty or comfort. But what about the rest of it? What about the suffering, the boredom, the pain, the endless, tedious, grinding through days that feel empty and exhausting? Are you telling me those have a point simply because they're happening? That seems like a rather cruel joke. And you're right to push back on that, because I'm not suggesting that suffering is good or that you should simply accept everything that happens as equally wonderful. But I am suggesting something else. I'm suggesting that the feeling of pointlessness, the exhaustion, the sense that nothing matters, this isn't actually caused by your circumstances. It's caused by the way you're relating to your circumstances, by the constant background assumption that life should be different than it is, that you should be different than you are, that there's somewhere else you're supposed to be, or something else you're supposed to be doing. Think about what happens when you're deeply engaged in something. Not forcing yourself to be engaged, not trying to care, but genuinely absorbed. Maybe you're having a conversation that fascinates you, or you're working on a problem that captures your full attention, or you're watching a sunset, or playing with a child, or reading something that speaks to you. In those moments, do you stop and ask, but what's the point of this? No, you don't, because the question doesn't arise. The experience itself is sufficient. It doesn't need justification because you're not separate from it, analyzing it, judging it. You're simply in it, part of it, flowing with it. The feeling of pointlessness, then, isn't about your life lacking meaning. It's about you standing outside your life, observing it, judging it, constantly evaluating whether it measures up to some imagined standard of what life should be. And from that position, of course, everything feels empty, because you've split yourself in two. There's the life that's happening, and then there's you, the observer, standing apart from it, asking if it's good enough, meaningful enough, worthwhile enough. And that observer, that judge, it's never satisfied, because satisfaction isn't its function. Its function is to evaluate, to compare, to find lacking. But who is this observer? Who is this judge that stands apart from life evaluating it? When you look closely, when you really try to find this separate self that's supposedly outside looking in, you can't find it. There's just experience happening, awareness of experience happening, but no separate entity apart from it all. The observer is itself part of the observed. The thinker of thoughts is just another thought. The self that seems to stand outside your life, questioning its meaning, is itself part of the life it's questioning. And this is where everything inverts. Because the search for meaning, the need to find a point to it all, this is itself the problem. Not because meaning doesn't exist, but because you're looking for it in the wrong way. You're looking for it as if meaning is something separate from experience, something that could be added to life to make it worthwhile. But meaning isn't separate from experience. Meaning is the texture of experience itself when you're fully present to it, when you're not busy evaluating it or wishing it were different. Let me put it another way. When you ask, what's the point? You're really asking, why should I care about this? And underneath that question is an assumption that you're separate from this, that you're a subject confronted with an object world that may or may not be worth your investment. But the actual truth of your experience, when you look at it directly, is that there's no such separation. You are not in the world encountering experiences that may or may not be meaningful. You are the world experiencing itself, knowing itself in this particular form, in this particular moment. The pointlessness you feel then is the exhaustion of maintaining this fiction of separation. It's tiring, isn't it? This constant evaluation, this endless questioning, this need to justify your existence. And the exhaustion itself is a kind of signal, a message from your deeper intelligence saying, stop, this isn't working, there's another way. What's the other way? It's the way of participation rather than observation. Instead of standing apart from your life asking what it means, you become your life, fully, completely. Not by forcing yourself to care about things you don't care about, but by dropping the question of whether you should care and simply allowing yourself to be present to what is. And here's the paradox. When you stop looking for meaning, when you stop demanding that life justify itself to you, meaning appears, not as something added to experience, but as the natural flavor of experience when you're not constantly filtering it through judgment and evaluation. A conversation becomes meaningful not because it's leading somewhere or accomplishing something, but because you're actually having it, actually listening, actually present. Work becomes meaningful not because it's fulfilling some grand purpose, but because you're actually doing it, bringing your full attention to it, engaging with it as it is, rather than as you think it should be. This is what the old Zen masters meant when they said that before enlightenment you chop wood and carry water, and after enlightenment you chop wood and carry water. The actions are the same, but the relationship to them is completely different. You're no longer standing outside your life wishing it were different, waiting for the meaningful part to begin. You're in your life as your life, and the question of meaning or pointlessness simply doesn't arise in the same way. Now, this doesn't mean that everything suddenly becomes wonderful, or that you're happy all the time, or that you stop wanting things to change. You'll still have preferences, still work toward goals, still hope for certain outcomes rather than others. But it's all much lighter, much less burdened, because you're not freighting every moment with this impossible demand that it justify your existence. You can want things without needing them to make your life meaningful. You can work toward goals without needing to achieve them to prove you're worthwhile. You can fail, struggle, suffer even, without it meaning that your life is pointless. Because here's what we've forgotten. Life doesn't need a point. That's not a depressing realization. It's actually deeply liberating. Because if life doesn't need a point, then you are free. Free from the crushing burden of having to make your life mean something. Free from the constant anxiety that you're not doing enough, not being enough, not living right. Free to simply be here, alive, aware, experiencing whatever is arising in this moment without needing it to be anything more than what it is. And in that freedom, something wonderful happens. The world becomes interesting again. Not because you've found the answer to the question of meaning, but because you've stopped asking the question in that desperate, grasping way. You start to notice things again. The quality of light in the morning, the taste of your coffee, the feeling of breath moving in your body, the strange miracle of being able to think thoughts and form words and communicate with other beings who are also somehow alive and aware. None of this needs to be for anything. It's enough that it is. You see, the universe, this whole vast unfolding process, it's not going anywhere. There's no destination it's trying to reach, no purpose it's trying to fulfill. It's simply playing itself out, moment by moment, in an infinite variety of forms. And you are one of those forms. You're what the universe is doing right here, right now, in this particular location. You're not in the universe having an experience. You are the universe having an experience of itself. And from this perspective, the question, what's the point, is like a wave asking, what's the point of being a wave? The wave isn't separate from the ocean, trying to justify its existence. The wave is what the ocean is doing in that moment. It arises, it moves, it falls, and then the water that formed the wave becomes part of the next wave. Nothing is lost. Nothing is wasted. Nothing needs to be for anything other than what it is. This is what the mystics have always tried to point to. Not a belief system you need to adopt, not a philosophy you need to follow, but a direct recognition of what you actually are underneath all the concepts and stories and judgments. You are not a separate self trying to find meaning in a meaningless universe. You are the universe meaning itself, knowing itself, experiencing itself in this particular form. And when that recognition really lands, not as an idea, but as a felt sense, everything changes and nothing changes. You still have your life, your responsibilities, your struggles and joys and mundane routines, but you're not carrying them in the same way. There's a lightness, a playfulness even, because you're not taking yourself quite so seriously anymore. You see, through the game of self, the story of me trying to make my life meaningful, trying to justify my existence, you realize you don't need to justify your existence. Your existence justifies itself simply by being. So what do you do with this? How do you live from this recognition? Well, you don't really do anything with it, because it's not a technique or a practice or a method. It's more like a remembering, a coming back to something you've always known but forgotten. And the forgetting is natural, part of the game. You'll forget and remember, probably for the rest of your life. But each time you remember, it gets a little easier, a little more familiar. And in the meantime, you just live. You do what needs doing, what calls to you, what appears in front of you. Not because it's meaningful, not because it's the right thing to do, not because it will make your life worthwhile, but simply because you're alive. And this is what being alive looks like. Sometimes it looks like work, sometimes like play, sometimes like suffering, sometimes like joy. All of it is life. All of it is the universe exploring itself through your form. The feeling of pointlessness, then, isn't your enemy. It's not a problem to be solved or a state to escape from. It's an invitation, a doorway, a call to wake up from the dream of separation, the exhausting fiction that you're a separate self trying to make a separate life meaningful. When everything feels pointless, that's life saying, stop trying so hard. Stop demanding that I be something I'm not. Just be here. Just be present. Just let yourself live without needing it to mean anything more than what it is. And that's enough. In fact, it's everything. Not because it's profound or spiritual or enlightened, but because it's actual. It's real. It's what's here when you stop looking somewhere else for something else that will finally make everything worthwhile. The whole search for meaning was a distraction from the only thing that's ever been real, which is this, right here, right now. Your life, exactly as it is, in all its ordinariness and extraordinariness, its beauty and its plainness, its joy and its sorrow. All of it, the whole catastrophe, as Zorba called it. Not meaningful or meaningless, but simply, wonderfully, mysteriously alive.
You've probably noticed this peculiar phenomenon, haven't you? You go to a gathering, a party, some social event, and you watch the people around you. They're animated, energized, feeding off the crowd like they're plugging into some great cosmic battery. They get louder as the evening goes on, more expansive, more alive. And then there's you, standing in the corner perhaps, or making your way through the motions. And with each passing hour, you can feel something draining out of you, like someone opened a tap at the bottom of your being, and your life force is slowly trickling away. And you wonder, what's wrong with me? Why am I not like them? Why does this thing that seems to enliven everyone else leave me feeling utterly depleted, exhausted, sometimes even a bit desperate to escape? Well, let me tell you something. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing at all. What you're experiencing is not a deficiency or a flaw in your design. You're simply wired differently. And the world, in its infinite wisdom, created both kinds of beings for very good reasons. You see, we've been sold this idea that the extroverted way of being is the right way, the healthy way, the normal way. That if you're not energized by crowds, if you don't seek out constant stimulation and interaction, then something must be broken in you. But this is nonsense, complete and utter nonsense. It's like saying that because some flowers bloom in full sunlight, the ones that prefer shade are somehow defective. The universe expresses itself in infinite variety. Some creatures are nocturnal, some diurnal, some hunt in packs, others alone. And among humans, some of us are built to process the world internally, in depth, in silence and solitude. We're not lesser versions of extroverts. We're different instruments in the orchestra, playing different notes, and both are necessary for the symphony. Now, what's actually happening at these gatherings that leaves you so drained? Let me explain it to you, because once you understand the mechanism, you'll stop pathologizing yourself and start honoring your own nature. When you walk into a room full of people, your nervous system begins doing something quite extraordinary. It's reading the room, not just consciously, but at levels far below conscious awareness. You're picking up on tones of voice, facial micro-expressions, body language, the subtle emotional currents flowing between people. You're processing an enormous amount of data, far more than you realize. The extrovert in the room is doing something different. They're broadcasting. They're putting out energy, and they're getting energy back from the responses they receive. It's an exchange, you see. And for them, it's energizing, because they're built for this kind of external processing. Their nervous system is designed to engage with the outer world in this direct, immediate way. But you're taking it all in. You're like a sponge, absorbing the emotional weather of the room, And here's the thing. You're not just observing it from a distance. You're actually feeling it. When someone in the room is anxious, you feel that anxiety in your own body. When there's tension between two people across the room, you sense it like a disturbance in the field. You're not just at the party, you're processing the party at a much deeper level. And this takes energy, tremendous energy. It's like the difference between watching a river from the shore and swimming in it. The extrovert is on the shore, watching, commenting, enjoying the view. You're in the water, feeling every current, every change in temperature, every bit of turbulence. Of course you're going to be tired afterward. You've been working, even though it doesn't look like work to the outside world. There's another aspect to this that's crucial to understand. Most social gatherings operate on a certain level of pretense. People are performing their social selves. They're not being authentic, not really. They're playing the game, wearing the mask, presenting the version of themselves that's acceptable, pleasant, appropriate. And for most people, this is fine. They can slip into the role quite easily, and they don't even notice they're doing it. But you notice. You notice the gap between what people are saying and what they're actually feeling. You notice the forced laughter, the polite lies, the conversations that are all surface and no substance. And this creates a kind of dissonance in you, a friction, because you can't quite participate in the pretense with the same ease. You want something real, something genuine, some actual connection beneath all the social choreography. And so you're caught. You're at this gathering, trying to play the game because that's what's expected, but simultaneously aware that it's a game. It's like being in a play where everyone else has forgotten their actors and thinks the stage is real life, and you're the only one who can still see the scenery for what it is. This awareness is exhausting. This double consciousness, being in the experience while simultaneously being aware of the artificiality of the experience, it takes a toll. Now, contrast this with what happens when you're alone. When you're alone, you can drop all the masks. You don't have to perform. You don't have to manage anyone else's emotional state or navigate complex social dynamics. You can just be. And in that being, in that simple, uncomplicated existence, there's a profound rest. The extrovert experiences being alone differently. For them, solitude can feel empty, understimulating. They need the external input, the interaction, the stimulation of other minds and personalities to feel fully alive. But for you, solitude is not deprivation, it's restoration. It's where you recharge. It's where you process all that input you've been absorbing, where you integrate your experiences, where you reconnect with yourself. This is why, after a gathering, you often need a significant recovery period. You're not just tired from staying up late or from the physical activity. You're tired because you've been processing vast amounts of subtle information, maintaining your social performance, managing the dissonance between authenticity and pretense, and absorbing the emotional field of everyone around you. You need time to discharge all of that, to let your nervous system settle, to return to your baseline. And here's what society doesn't tell you, what you need to understand in your bones. This is not a weakness. This is not something to be fixed or overcome. The depth of processing you're capable of, the sensitivity of your perception, these are gifts. Yes, they come with challenges. Yes, they make certain situations more difficult. But they also allow you to see things others miss, to understand at levels others cannot reach, to experience life with a richness and depth that the purely extroverted person may never know. The problem is not that you're drained by social gatherings. The problem is that we live in a society that has organized itself around extroverted values and then pathologized everyone who doesn't fit that mold. We've created a world where constant interaction is valued over deep reflection, where breadth of social connection is prized over depth of understanding, where being the life of the party is seen as superior to being the thoughtful observer in the corner. But think about what the world would lose if everyone was an extrovert. Who would do the deep thinking? Who would create the art, write the books, make the scientific discoveries that require long hours of solitary focus? Who would see the patterns that emerge only in quiet contemplation? Who would understand the subtle truths that reveal themselves only to those who know how to be still? The universe needs both. It needs the ones who are energized by interaction and the ones who are energized by solitude. It needs the broadcasters and the receivers. It needs those who skim along the surface of life and those who dive into the depths. Both are necessary. Both are valuable. Both are exactly as they should be. So when you find yourself at a gathering, feeling that familiar drain beginning, you can make a choice. You can honor your nature instead of fighting it. You can leave early without guilt. You can find the one or two people there who are capable of real conversation and spend your time with them rather than trying to work the whole room. You can take breaks, step outside, give yourself moments of quiet in the midst of the noise, and you can stop measuring yourself against the extroverts in the room. Stop thinking that their way of being is the right way and yours is the wrong way. They're playing their instrument, you're playing yours. Neither is better, they're just different notes in the same cosmic song. What you're experiencing at these gatherings is not pathology. It's sensitivity. It's depth. It's a particular way of processing reality that has its own wisdom, its own gifts, its own place in the grand scheme of things. The drain you feel is simply the cost of being built for depth in a world that often operates on the surface. But here's the beautiful thing. Once you truly accept this about yourself, once you stop trying to be something you're not, once you honor your need for solitude and limited social interaction, you'll find that the social interactions you do have become more meaningful, because you're no longer scattering your energy trying to be like everyone else. You're being yourself, and that authenticity attracts the kind of connections that actually nourish rather than drain you. You'll find your people. The other deep processors, the other ones who prefer one profound conversation to 10 superficial ones, the other ones who know that silence between two people can be more intimate than any words. And with these people, gathering won't feel like such a drain, because there's less pretense, less performance, more genuine meeting. So the next time you're at a gathering and you feel that drain beginning, remember this: you're not broken, you're not antisocial, you're not defective. You're a different kind of instrument, built for a different kind of music. And the world needs your music just as much as it needs the loud, bright songs of the extroverts. Honor your nature. Protect your energy. And trust that being exactly who you are is not just okay, it's necessary.